Last night, several authors of the Twitter files, including Barry Weiss, Michael Schellenberger, David Zweig, and Nellie Bowles, answered subscribers' questions to the real story behind their reporting. Since the release of the first batch a few weeks ago, the Twitter files have reported on how the platform handled former President Trump's ban, its secret blacklist, and its interference in the coronavirus debate.
But how did this reporting all come together? Did Elon Musk direct the authors in any way? Why is the reporting being spaced out and not released all at once? Well, we have two of the authors themselves with us today. Writers Michael Schellenberger and David Zweig join us now to explain it all. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
So I'll start with you, Michael. There has been some, questioning, some conversation, especially among the liberal media, about why it is that the particular journalists involved are the ones involved, whether there's any intention of opening up more broadly, and whether or not there would be more credibility and more attention, frankly, paid by the mainstream media to the content of the Twitter files if the kind of stable of folks that were reporting on these documents were broader and perhaps more ideologically diverse. Tell us how this all happened and how, if at all, you would respond to those kinds of criticisms.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for inviting us to actually address them, because it's shocking that people have made a set of false claims about the Twitter files without actually interviewing any of us. So one of the things that people say is that the reporters were all handpicked by Elon Musk. That's not true. I was asked by my friend Barry Weiss to come in and help her with this. When I arrived at the office, I happened to see Elon Musk making himself a cup of coffee. I introduced myself to him. He said he did not know who I was. Just as background, I've criticized Elon Musk repeatedly over the last decade. In Mother Jones a decade ago, I criticized him for advocating the closure of California's last nuclear plant, and I criticized his statements on solar panels in my book Apocalypse Never. So either if he did know, which he says he didn't and Barry said he didn't, then that's either false, or the idea that he chose people that were sympathetic to him, it's also false. There is also no sense from him that he really cared that, what any of our other views were. He was looking for reporters to come in and do basically what they said, which was to go through the documents and release them. The thing I think one people have to understand is that there's just huge amounts of documents that we were given. I can't prove that none of them were filtered, but I saw no evidence of that. We were given very big chunks of emails, like 10,000 emails or 15,000 emails to go through. Lots of information. It would have been very difficult for anybody to filter it. I think more people should get into the Twitter files. I think there should be a huge diversity of people in there. I had a German reporter reach out to me a couple of days ago, ask if they could get access to the German Twitter files. I passed on the request to Elon Musk. I think it's important to remember that we are not Elon Musk. We do not work for Twitter. We had a chance to cover a major story. I'm very disappointed, though probably not surprised, that the mainstream news media haven't really sought to understand it. As far as I know, there haven't been significant requests to go in there themselves. So it kind of is what it is. I would love to see all the files released. I think it's hard to do because you have to redact so many names and you have to protect privacy, but it just kind of is what it is. I appreciate a chance to address it openly.
David, why don't you speak to your involvement and what the process has been like for you?
Yeah, I was there while Michael was there, and my experience is similar to his as far as he described his access. Barry Weiss had contacted me and said, hey, Twitter files, we would love you to come out and be our guy for COVID-related matters. I said, done. And I think what people don't realize is any journalist who has access to something, whatever it is, at Twitter or some other institution, wants to go look at it. It was immaterial whether it's Elon Musk or someone else. We were given access to files that might help illuminate all sorts of things that millions of people are interested in. Of course, we're going to go look at it, but I had no interaction with Musk at all. And I can also say, just sort of dovetailing with what Michael said, while we were there, the type of searches we were doing were very difficult to do. It's not how some people characterize it or imagine it, where we could just go in and look up anything we wanted. It was very tedious, complicated process with putting in a request for, we want to see emails from such and such person during these dates with these keywords or something like that. And it could take hours or all day to get something back. And we also had an engineer in the room with us who's doing a different type of searches in the sort of like back end of Twitter, looking at different people's accounts. So he was actually doing that in front of me while I'm like looking over his shoulder. So unless there was like a very sophisticated ruse going on, I mean, we watched him literally doing the searches that we were requesting in the room. So it's hard to imagine how there was any sort of like filtering or something done, at least with those types of searches.
Yeah, I completely appreciate that the news value of this is evident, and anybody kind of questioning why any journalist wouldn't want to take a peek doesn't really understand journalism, I would say. But Michael, just going back to your point, I mean, I completely appreciate that also you're not Elon Musk and you're not the ones that are making decisions about who gets access to it, and you said that you would love it to be more broadly accessible and that you've recommended folks to be able to come in, and that your involvement is only because, Bari Weiss reached out to you. But some people might hear that and say, well, constructively, if Elon Musk picked the first cohort of journalists to report on it, and then the only ones that get brought in are people who happen to be friends or acquaintances or professional acquaintances with the people who were initially picked, well, that still keeps perhaps the kind of ideological circle relatively tight, and it is a kind of unintentional but a constructive gatekeeping that's going on here. And so, you mentioned that you had recommended that somebody else be involved. Has anybody that you recommended been approved basically by Elon Musk? Do you have the sense that it's likely that he is open to the suggestions that are made by those of you who have already been granted access to the files?
On the last question, I just don't know. I mean, I just would challenge literally most of the media have been fawning over Elon Musk over the last decade. I don't know of anybody who had been as critical of Elon Musk on terms of solar issues, in terms of nuclear, in terms of his core issues than me. And I was in there. Li Fong from The Intercept came in. It's a very progressive magazine. Li Fong is one of the most well-regarded independent investigative journalists in the country, given his investigations, particularly into efforts by DHS, FBI, and other groups to try to censor so-called misinformation. As far as I know, Elon had no idea, who Li Fong was when he came in there. So I think there's a lot of carping going on, and I think there's sort of a sense of, I think there's some professional jealousy, and I just think there's a lot of behavior that isn't really the kind of behavior you'd expect from journalists. You would expect journalists to be like climbing over themselves to fight to get in there and demanding a chance to review the files or discussing the files that have been released. Instead, it's basically become a thing where somehow they want to make the journalists involved in the issue. It's bizarre. It would be like attacking the New York Times for publishing the Pentagon Papers.
Well, frankly, the most recent release, I think, starts to help understand why journalists would want this story to go away, because, frankly, a lot of mainstream publications are very much compromised by reporting that I think it was Taibbi was the author of the most recent drop about the Russian bots list and how that narrative was run with in the mainstream media, and Twitter itself, Yoel Roth finding out that was reverse engineering it, finding out that it was fake. That the significant part of the whole RussiaGate conversation, made up, pushed by former national security advisors, and Twitter internally debunks it, but is afraid to speak about that publicly because the kind of fervor around the Russia narrative it's at a fever pitch. And that makes a lot of people look really bad. It makes certain people at Twitter maybe look bad. It makes the mainstream media look terrible. So, David, do you think there's maybe a reluctance to take on the Twitter files from the mainstream media because now it puts in light some of their, I think, hyperbole, specifically around Russia stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think Taibbi's recent reporting is embarrassing to a lot of media outlets. They, at least according to Matt's reporting, which I read quickly, so I can't speak precisely to it, but it certainly appears that a whole lot of prestigious media outlets were reporting on information that wasn't backed up. There was this, Hamilton 68 thing. And so They have, so that's an explicit example where they would have an incentive to not want to report something that showed that they were had a lot of stories that were about something that wasn't true. But I think in a sort of pulling the lens back in a broader sense, a lot of the reporting that we've been pulling out of there and the things we're finding are sort of against a popular narrative that they had done. And you see that, with the COVID thread that I did and lots of reporting that Michael had done. And so I think it's not even about like specific articles that were embarrassing, but the sort of like broader narrative that had been going on a whole variety of topics. And, to me, what's interesting is the last time I checked, my thread on Twitter had more than 60 million views. And even if they thought the revelations that I had in there, and I'm sure Michael's threads have that and then some, because he's done a ton of reporting on this. Even if they thought this was a quote nothing burger, the fact that it had so much attention within this platform shows that this is a story in and of itself. So it's fascinating to me how, at least from what I've observed, these most of the Twitter files has basically been ignored and dismissed. And I think that's strange. Even if they think the content is unimportant, the mere fact that these threads are getting tens of millions of views is a story in and of itself that they're not covering.
Michael, I have been struck by, in reading your dispatches and then in reporting I've done on Facebook, what went on there, the amount of pressure coming from people within federal agencies, the CDC, the FBI, the White House at times, for years, influencing decisions about COVID, about elections, about what you're able to say about those subjects, Hunter Biden, et cetera. And what both you and David and Taibbi and Li Fang and others have shown is that there was actually internal debate in Twitter about how to handle these things. And there was pushback. There was resistance from people, including Yoel Roth, who was very demonized, I think correctly called out for some mistakes he might have made. But then you also see examples of people saying, look, we're not going to go along with this. They're whipping up the Russia stuff out of nowhere. And then they cave after the pressure gets amped up. So what is your takeaway from having seen and getting such an inside glimpse of how a company responds in real time to the tremendous power of the federal government?
Well, it's absolutely chilling. I mean, this is a situation you have to understand that Congress and the White House was repeatedly threatening to basically take away from the internet platforms the legal basis of their existence, which of course is the Section 230, which gives the internet company, the platforms and the internet companies liability protection from being sued for slander or for copyright violations by people. So I think there's a confusion. People think the New York Times and Twitter are both media companies. They're not. Twitter has a special status. Facebook has special status under this Section 230. And so what you saw was Facebook, particularly, egregious. You saw Facebook executives showing the White House and explaining to the White House that we are censoring accurate information about COVID because we don't want it to encourage vaccine hesitancy. So they're literally going to the White House and saying, look, we're trying to censor accurate information. You saw Twitter censoring and flagging content on Martin Kildorff, who's this Harvard professor, just saying maybe not everybody needs to be vaxxed, a totally reasonable decision. So yeah, you saw Yoel Roth and others inside Twitter pushing back against it, but ultimately caving in. I think that's important to realize. You saw both on the decision to deplatform Trump and also on the decision to censor the New York Post story about the Hunter Biden laptop. Ultimately, they decided that these tweets in question had not violated Twitter's own terms of service, and then decided anyway to deplatform the president and to censor the Hunter Biden laptop. So it's chilling. I'm not a legal expert. I can't say whether it's a violation of the First Amendment. But when you're pressuring those companies and threatening their entire existence, and then making demands, including also deplatforming Alex Berenson, another COVID skeptic, COVID critic, making those demands, it starts to look like a violation of the First Amendment. To me, it has to be worked out in court. It will be worked out in court, but it certainly merits more investigation. And the final thing I'll say is something that I've found a lot of agreement, by the way, on left and right, is that there needs to be absolute transparency by these media companies as a condition for them being protected under Section 230 transparency into how content moderation decisions are being made. Those are not, that's not intellectual proprietary information. These are human decisions being made by the platforms with massive ramifications. There may be other regulations that are required, but at a minimum, there needs to be transparency. And I think that's something that people that are really concerned about civil liberties and concerned about misinformation alike could agree on.
David, I just wanted to ask one last question. We've mentioned a lot of, I would characterize them as bad faith critics of the reporting on the Twitter files, the selection of journalists, perhaps professional jealousy playing a role, et cetera. But one person who I think has been a real ally of this effort and of creating transparency and free speech absolutism is Glenn Greenwald, who I interviewed on my podcast a couple of weeks ago, and he said, quote, "I would probably not have felt totally comfortable, to be honest, with the way the Twitter files was done. I'm not willing to be manipulated by the possibility that people are handpicking what they want me to see or what they don't want me to see." And he went on to contextualize that more, and people should listen to his full remarks. But he said that I had asked him whether he would be comfortable being one of the Twitter files journalists, and he had some concerns about what information would ultimately be getting to him. You made reference to the process of watching as documents were culled and provided to you. Is that what happened in each instance, that while the document searches were being run, you were there to review the process? Or is it possible, and are there any concerns amongst you, that ultimately there was some kind of pre-filtering or any kind of post-search filtering that prevented perhaps some newsworthy documents that might have painted a different picture of the nature of the censorship having gotten to you?
Yeah, good question. So there are a number of different things that we were searching for, and each of those things had a different process in place. So the engineer was looking up different accounts when we were trying to look at whether there were certain sort of tags labeled on specific tweets and on specific accounts. So that's one type of search that was being done through this sort of special viewfinder. A different type of search was looking at these like really large aggregate pots of emails and Slack channel communications. Those were done not in the room with us. It is entirely possible that some sort of very sophisticated process was done in the interim of when we would make the request, and then they quickly went in and somehow deleted specific tweets and then sent us, the thing. I don't know enough about the sort of technical aspect to pull something like that off. But as Michael said, I think, we were getting emails. We're talking about thousands and thousands. We're getting just massive documents of Slack channel communications. I think it would have been and it's not like they had it and then sent it to us 3 weeks later. We're talking about all this was happening on the fly. So yes, it's theoretically possible if I didn't watch someone doing it in front of me. But I would say, isn't that the case in pretty much any sort of whistleblower thing? Someone's giving you information. There's always going to be some hurdles, some challenges, in when the New York Times reports on something or a zillion other places, when some sort of insider or whistleblower is giving you content, there always will be some unknown, I suspect, and you use your best judgment as a journalist and as an intelligent person to figure out, well, how likely is it that this content was filtered in some manner? But the process that we went through, or at least that I went through, is, as I described, and people can use their own judgment if they think that that's not reliable.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair, although I do think there's a distinction between, let's say, a whistleblower at the FBI blowing the whistle on the FBI or the NSA or something like that, and the CEO of the FBI, the person who's running the institution, kind of opening the kimono, as it were. But I appreciate both of you.
The whistleblower can have an agenda too.
Oh, yeah, of course, but there's inherent in it is a conflict of interest between them and their employer, and that's why they're whistleblowing. And so if Edward, if Chelsea Manning deleted emails that showed that she was taking 3-hour lunch breaks, maybe that's significant.
I mean,
that is
employer dissatisfaction is a major motivator of whistleblower behavior. So that is something that.
But my interest in knowing something like bad about Chelsea Manning's personal behavior is not quite the same as the overlapping interest, I would argue, between Twitter and the CEO of Twitter. But we appreciate both of you spending so much time with us.
Very illustrative. Thank you so much, Michael, David. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
We'll have more Rising. Oh, I'm sorry.
We'll have more Rising for you right after this.